The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. We hope everybody is keeping healthy and staying safe. Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar today, hosted by Nextdyne on transfer pricing and GST interplay. In today's webinar, we shall discuss the common challenges that businesses are currently facing and strategies that could be adopted to deal with them by way of sharing practical experiences. Joining the discussion today are our tax experts Lokesh Gupta from the transfer pricing team and Shivendra Dwivedi from the indirect tax team. To introduce our speakers in a gist, Lokesh has been with Nextdyne for almost a decade. He has been managing clients across industries. He is responsible for developing the global transfer pricing practice at Nextdyne, including developing capabilities and relevant skill sets for niche areas, financial transactions, and intangible related transactions. Shivendra, on the other hand, has 9 years of experience in handling advisory and compliance assignments under service tax, customs, GST, and the foreign trade policy. His expertise includes handling litigation under customs and transaction structuring under GST. Before we begin, note that all our listeners are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please share them with us through the questions box on the right-hand side of the control panel available on your screen, and Lokesh and Shivendra will be happy to address your queries towards the end of the webinar. We are very happy to have you with us today. We hope you enjoy the insights shared by our speakers. Without any further delay, we shall start. Over to you, Lokesh and Shivendra.
Hello everyone, this is Shivendra, and while Lokesh shares the screen for everyone to see, I would welcome you all to this webinar and would like to introduce you to the agenda first. Just giving you a brief background of what the topics we are going to cover today. First, we will be laying out the background, why the topic is relevant, and the interplay between GST and TP is gaining increasing importance. We will go towards, we will talk about the need for harmony between the GST and TP provisions. We will look at the important definitions, the valuation methods prescribed under both laws. We will be dealing also with some very specific issues, and also we'll be taking up a few case studies and examining specific transactions. Few of them are free of cost goods and services, both inbound and outbound. Then we would look at corporate guarantee, both inbound and outbound. We would look at some cost plus models and other back office operation models typically followed in transfer pricing, and also it would examine the intermediary risk involved in such transactions. We'll examine the notional remuneration for advertising, marketing, and promotion expenses, domestic related party transactions, and finally we will conclude with the interplay from the perspective of authorities in both laws and the COVID-19 impact in both legislations, and conclude with the best practices.
Thank you, Shiva, and thank you, Jugal, for the wonderful introduction. I once again give a warm welcome to all of you all. Thank you for joining in. It's most definitely, I think all of you all who are practicing or working in the tax field, they would know how critical the GST and transfer pricing interplay is. In fact, in some of the areas, how it pulls each other on the opposite side, and that's what makes it very interesting to understand what is it that we got to know from TP as well as GST perspective when we are looking at a particular transaction. One thing that is really common between TP and TP and GST is, I would call it a binding factor, and that is both are at transaction level tax. Although transfer pricing most of the times is taken care at the year end once the books are closed, but ideally speaking, transfer pricing is a transaction level tax. So very quickly, just to set the background, transfer pricing applies when there are two entities, cross-border scenario, and any transaction between the two entities who are situated cross-border. If they are a related party, the transaction gets covered under the transfer pricing. In some situations, even the domestic transactions are covered, but those are only those transactions where there is an arbitrage or tax arbitrage opportunity available. Otherwise, as most of you all must be aware, that the domestic transfer pricing has been taken away altogether. So Shiva, quickly, you want to take up what does GST?
Yes. As Lokesh mentioned, both are transaction level taxes, and valuation is a binding factor. And GST, whereas wherever a related party question comes under GST, it encompasses both international as well as domestic transactions. And transactions between related parties across the board will be subject to valuation rules. We will also look at what are the exceptions where the valuation rules may not be that relevant under GST. But of course, the intersection happens when the valuation rules under GST and TP are applied to international transactions. Lokesh, can you?
Yeah,
yes.
that's right.
I will.
Yeah.
I will also lay down why harmony is needed between the GST and TP provisions. As of now, the definitions of both of the related party and associate enterprises in both laws are very different, as we'll be seeing in the subsequent slides. It is not necessary that two parties which are related in GST may also be related under transfer pricing provisions, and vice versa. Secondly, the rules for valuation and how you select those rules for valuation and apply them can also be very different in both the laws. GST being a recent law, still evolving one, the rules and the guidance available for valuation is still very limited. Whereas TP being a specific area which deals with valuation and the methods for the valuation, definitely contains a much expansive guidance. So the dichotomy arises due to this fact also. Lastly, there is increased sharing of information between GST and TP authorities. So position adopted in GST may, if it is deviating from the position adopted in TP and there is inconsistencies, sharing of information may lead to scrutiny of authorities. And therefore, it is important that there should be consistency in positions adopted to avoid any adverse tax consequences.
Very, very well said, Shiva. There is a need. There is definitely a need for harmony between GST and TP, and you rightly pointed out. Now in the digital era, most of the filings that are happening as a part of compliance from TP as well as GST perspective, most of the filings are happening electronic, and the tax authorities at a central level are sitting with a huge amount of data, and it is very easy, to compare what filings have done for GST purposes and what filings have been done for TP purposes. And if it is not harmonized by the taxpayers, I think there are likely to be challenges. In fact, I already see, a lot of customs authorities trying to have more interaction with the tax authorities on the transfer pricing side. All right, I think that takes us to a first topic. Having understood why is the need for harmony. The first topic is, what does related party mean? So what does it mean as per the transfer pricing laws, and what does it mean under the GST? Well, I think Shiva briefly mentioned that transfer pricing has a slightly more expansive guidance. It's maybe maybe that could be a case because transfer pricing has definitions such as loan related criteria or guarantee related criteria or appointment of board related criteria. Otherwise, if you look at both transfer pricing and GST purposes, the voting power criteria, there is hardly any difference. While the transfer pricing says 26% shareholding, the GST law says that 25% shareholding would be enough. One of the key differences I would highlight in the definition of related party under both the laws is GST says that the employer-employee relations are also related party, whereas there is no such concept under the transfer pricing. Transfer pricing goes strictly by way of either the shareholding or the loan criteria or the guarantee. Guarantee, for example, if the parent has guaranteed, or if the company has guaranteed more than 10% of the total borrowing, automatically the company becomes a related party. So therefore, it is very difficult to judge or conclude whether the TP is a more expansive definition or GST has a more expansive.
Lokesh, I'm sorry we lost you out there. There seems to be some difficulty with the audio.
Yes, Jugal, if I'm audible, I'll just continue from where Lokesh left, and whenever he's back, he can continue.
Sure.
As Lokesh was saying, yes, I hope, Jugal, I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible, Shivendra. Please go ahead.
Yes, as Lokesh was saying, I'll just continue from there, that in certain situations, the related party definition under GST looks more expansive, whereas in the different other situations, the transfer pricing definition may look to be more expansive. A few examples that Lokesh has already cited, but I would like to point out from GST perspective, two key examples where the criteria where under GST some parties will constitute a related party relationship, whereas it will not be so under transfer pricing. These are the employees and employer relationship. So an employer and employee will always be a related party under GST, whereas not so under TP. And another will be the business dependency, where if it is a sole distributor or an agent relationship, then also they will constitute a related party under GST, whereas not so under TP.
That is right. That is right. Thank you, Shiva. I think I was in between. There was some connection issue. Apologies for that. All right. That takes us to the important question of how is the valuation carried out? We are talking about a transaction price. So a price has to be assigned basis a valuation method. So what are the valuation methods when I look at a customs perspective or a transfer pricing perspective or a GST perspective? So as you all can observe from the screen, transfer pricing has slightly more robust mechanism to value a particular transaction. And I think how Shiva also mentioned right at the beginning, this is a more specific provision, and therefore it has much more guidance for application of each of these methods as well. So at most of the times, even for customs purposes, when the valuation is being carried out, we see that most of the times they refer to OECD guidelines, etc., which are nothing but a transfer pricing related benchmarking methods. On the other hand, if we look at GST, GST does not have an expansive literature, etc., or guidance, etc., on the application of methods, but there is a possibility that for GST purposes also the tax authorities might want to refer transfer pricing methods or methods of benchmarking. Shiva, your views?
Yes. So as we can see on the screen, we have valuation methods under all the three laws: customs, transfer pricing, and GST. And in all the three provisions, there is somewhat of a similarity as far as the valuation methods are concerned. But under GST, the chronology of applying those valuation methods has to be followed very strictly. For example, GST, if there is a related party transaction, always first we will have to refer the open market value for valuing a transaction. If it is not available, then we would move on to the next option, that is value of supply of goods and services like kind and quality. Then would come the value based on cost plus 10% markup, and then the residual methods of applying the valuation based on the best judgment or the provisions consistent with other provisions of the GST law. Whereas it may not be so under customs and transfer pricing. We may have an option here that we can select the most appropriate method in a given situation. And one more very important thing, that a thread that will be carried forward throughout this presentation and this webinar from the GST perspective, I would like to mention here that under GST, for a transaction between two related parties, if input tax credit is fully available to the recipient, then the valuation rules very clearly say that the invoice value would be deemed as the open market value. Because all of you may be well aware, if a transaction on which an input tax credit is fully available to the recipient, then there will be no revenue loss to the government, because a tax charge on 100 rupees, that is 18 rupees, or a tax charge on 500 rupees, which will be 90. The entire credit in both the situations will be available to the receiving party, and therefore valuation would only will remain a technical or an academic issue without any loss to government. Therefore, whenever we are looking at a related party transaction under GST, the valuation becomes significantly important in scenarios where input tax credit is not available to the recipient. We will be looking at those examples also.
Right. I think let's look at an example of valuation under customs and how sometimes a valuation will come into picture as per GST as well. Let's look at, or let's try and understand through this case study. So the case is there is a parent company in USA. It has a subsidiary company in India. Indian subsidiary company is mainly responsible for importing and distribution of electronic related, let's say, products in India. So the structure is parent company supplies the fully manufactured goods, let's say a electronic printer, and Indian subsidiary then passes on or sells the printer to the end customers in India. So while for the purpose of customs, what customs would look at is they would want to value the purchase price appropriately to ensure that the base value is correct. And the customs aim would be to keep the purchase value or the invoice value as higher as possible, because the base would become a critical factor for them to compute the customs duty. And typically what we have seen is, if in this kind of an arrangement, if there is any royalty payment that the Indian subsidiary is paying, then the royalty is typically added on the invoice price of the goods by the customs authorities, and accordingly the valuation is done. When I say royalty, let's say if the invoice value for the printer from the US to India is 100, and if the royalty paid is let's say $5, then customs would determine the base value for the purpose of customs duty at 105. Whereas if we look at from a transfer pricing perspective, a transfer pricing authority or a tax authority would always want to keep the purchase price on a lower end, and therefore they would look at 100 rupee purchase price vis-a-vis the arm's length standard, and they would typically adopt an approach such as compare with the third party price, compare the distribution margin, etc., etc. And you would not see any loading happen. Rather, they would question whether the purchase price is higher or not. So therefore, while customs is adopting a invoice value plus a royalty value as a valuation method, the same valuation can't be accepted by the tax authorities, or the client can't take that value as a justifiable or arm's length value for transfer pricing purposes. Take another case in the same example. Let's say what happens if the parent company is also supplying the free warranty parts, because these printers that are sold by the Indian subsidiary to the end customer, they are, let's say, assuming that they are covered by 2 years warranty. The warranty obligation naturally lies with the manufacturer, who is a parent entity in USA, and therefore for the spare parts that the Indian company gets, they will have to utilize those spare parts for the purpose of warranty here. And you all would appreciate that it is not only the spare parts, but the service engineer will also have to visit the end customer premises in order to fix that spare part. And there will always be some service element which the Indian entity would be rendering towards the warranty effort. Now the question is, what happens to the efforts of the Indian entity towards the warranty services? Should this be compensated? Well, obviously, from a transfer pricing perspective, it is good, or it is actually required that the Indian entity is compensated for the warranty efforts also. However, you will also come across certain cases where the clients would say that, well, my warranty related compensation is already inbuilt in the purchase price. My parent entity has invoiced me at a price which also takes care of the warranty effort that I have made. Well, it becomes an interesting case, because whether, if I say that I don't take compensation for the warranty services, would GST authorities also accept it? Shiva, your views?
Yes. For the warranty services, in this example, and assuming that the warranty risk and the product liability risk is borne by the manufacturer, any warranty services that the ABC India subsidiary in India would be undertaking for the end customers on behalf of ABC USA will definitely attract the attention of the GST authorities, because even if there is no consideration that the ABC India subsidiary is recovering from its parent, because they are related parties, some amount of consideration, the valuation may become important. Now, even if the valuation is done in this regard, there are two things that may happen from a GST standpoint. One is that any consideration that is attributable, or any value of these services, of the free warranty services that ABC India is or can recover from ABC USA, can be considered firstly as an export if the place of supply is outside India. It would not be an export in a scenario where the services are related to a good situated in India, where in this example, this is a possibility that the services are in relation to a goods that are made available to ABC India for the servicing, and therefore the place of supply may fall in India. So if a valuation is done for these warranty services, then even if the supply is made to ABC USA, this may not be an export and may invite scrutiny of the authorities and GST liability in India.
Well, that becomes interesting. So now we're talking about a scenario where, for GST purposes, we will value these warranty services and we will include it in the GST returns, and we will also pay GST. Now that makes it very interesting, because if I disclose this particular warranty services in the GST returns, that can catch an eye of the income tax authorities as well. It would say that if you already valued this, and for GST purposes, if you feel that the warranty services are rendered and they are notionally valued at X price, why should it not be recovered from the parent entity? And that could invite a trouble from the tax authority perspective, keeping in mind the transfer pricing laws. Well, I feel the message is very clear that, if this kind of setup is there, operating setup is there, it is very important to ideally understand the functions of the Indian entity. And if the Indian entity happens to be providing any or making any efforts towards the warranty related services, it has to be demonstrated or justified that those warranty services are compensated appropriately. Right. We touched upon free of cost services in the form of warranty. Let's look at a case study which involves free of cost import of goods, or as well as inbound as well as outbound scenario. Shiva, you want to take up?
Yes. So we are on the topic of where free of cost goods and services are provided by a parent company to a subsidiary company in India. In this example, as we can see, both IT goods as well as services IT services as well as laptops are supplied by a parent company to the subsidiary company in India. For any goods that are inbound goods which a subsidiary company receives in India, because it's a related party import, that will be outside the GST ambit and would be subject to customs valuation rules and would be handled by the special valuation branch. So any free of supply goods, whenever an import happens, it should be with a value for customs duty purposes in India. If it is not with a value, then customs authorities would proceed to determine value of these imports on an arm's length basis, applying the methods available under the customs valuation rules. And whatever value is determined for customs, IGST would have to be paid on it under the customs law itself. So for wherever the free of cost goods are concerned, import, the GST would be out of the picture and customs would take over. Whereas for services, for any services that are received free of cost from a parent company, their GST valuation rules will become very important. As I said in the beginning of the presentation, if the Indian party is eligible to full input tax credit of the services that are provided, then even then the provision says that the invoice value would be deemed to be the open market value. In this case, given that the goods are free, there would not be an invoice value, and it's an open question whether a zero value or free value would be considered acceptable under GST. Whereas in a scenario where full input tax credit is not available to a company in India, for example, if a company in India is engaged in providing both exempt and taxable supplies, then the input tax credit is subject to reversal. In that case, any free services that are received from the parent company, the input tax credit would be subject to reversal, and hence the exemption under the GST valuation rules that the invoice value would be deemed to be the open market value would not apply, and we will have to proceed valuing these services and paying GST under reverse charge for services.
Right, Shiva. I think what in essence the message is that as long as you are doing a valuation for this free of cost goods or services and you're paying GST, and as long as you're going to get a full credit, it doesn't really matter because your cost from a GST perspective is actually nullified. And honestly speaking, even from a transfer pricing perspective, if the services are coming in free, or for that matter even goods are coming in free, as such it should not become a problem because the tax authorities would be happy if the tax base is higher and not lower. However, interesting situation can arise. Let's say, for example, if there is a case where the Indian entity is operating as a cost plus model. Now, a cost plus model, typically how the remuneration happens is all the costs of Indian entity are loaded. Therefore, a question props up: can the tax authority say that you have received some free of cost services, and had they been accounted in the Indian company's book, you would have also claimed a markup on those services, and those, to that extent, the Indian company's revenue would have been higher? Well, it can definitely be said. I think all of you, those especially who have faced APA related scrutiny, they would agree with me that these questions are very common from the APA authorities, as in, is there any free of cost services or goods that the Indian company is receiving? They always scrutinize it, and they want to understand what will be the implication if those are added to the cost base. Let's look at an outbound scenario, Shiva.
Yes. As we saw in the case of inbound, here the subsidiary company would be providing free samples or services to the parent company outside India. First, let's look at the outbound goods example. If any goods are supplied free of cost, so it will lead, it will be an export transaction because the goods are taken out of India. Under GST, the definition of goods is the definition of export of goods is very interesting. It merely mentions that the goods should be taken out of India for the purpose of the supply qualifying as export. So if there are samples that are being exported from a GST standpoint, even if there is no consideration received, and there is a need for valuing these services because these are supplies between related parties, there may not be any GST that may be applicable on that, this being an export transaction being zero rated. And if there is an LUT available with the company, then there is no requirement of paying any GST, even if notional value is assigned to such free sample exports. However, the volume of how much free supplies can be given will be always be subject to the customs and exchange control regulations also, because it would invite the attention of authorities if exports are made without any recovery of foreign exchange. This was as far as the goods were concerned. For services, this also leads to an interesting outcome. Any services that are provided free of cost, the definition of export of services in GST law has a condition which says that an export of service will be a zero rated supply only if convertible foreign exchange is received in India. However, in for free supplies of services, this condition would not be met, and hence for all other, even if all other conditions of export of service are satisfied, that is the place of supply is outside India, there may be a possibility that value would need to be assigned for this free supply of services. And because the condition of zero rated supply is not fulfilled, GST liability and exposure will become very important.
That's right. That's right. I think from TP perspective, unlike an inbound situation, an outbound situation is a concern. While samples, etc., are very easy to defend or justify, saying that it is in my own interest that I'm sending the samples to promote the business. However, anything which is going free of cost outside of the Indian company, especially to overseas jurisdiction, that requires a lot of justification and documentation to prove that why it has not been charged. So outbound is a very different scenario. Now the question comes, if for a free of cost outbound services, if GST values it for the purpose of GST levying, etc., then can the tax authorities also challenge it, saying that you've already valued it for the GST purposes? And can tax authority says that, if not charging, then can you at least, should this at least be disclosed in the form number 3CB? Especially where, form number 3CB says that transactions without any consideration should also be reported or highlighted. So these are, contentious items while preparing the form number 3CB. Always good to look at the GST returns to understand if there is anything which is appearing in the GST return and that is valued, but that is not appearing in the books. We have to be very careful whether it, and making a right judgment whether it requires a disclosure in form 3CB or not. Because as most of you all must be aware that non-disclosure in form 3CB would lead to a straight penalty of 2% of the transaction value. Therefore, it's a risky proposition. And the message is that always good to look at GST returns if there are any free of cost goods or services going out of India. All right. Concluding remarks. While from TP perspective, like we discussed, the TP authorities would be happy in the case of inbound, but the tax authorities would not be happy if the things are similar in the outbound case, especially if you don't have a proper justification for sending out of free of cost samples or free of cost services. Disclosure in form 3CB becomes a very, very critical point for an outbound scenario, and therefore, the key thing is to look at all the disclosures in the GST returns as well. Shiva, you want to quickly cover up for GST and customs?
Right. This slide essentially summarizes the discussion of the previous two slides. So for the inbound free of cost supply, wherever the goods are concerned, it will be subject to customs valuation and GST would not have any rule. For services, it is advisable to determine an open market value and pay GST on it under a reverse charge mechanism. especially an ITC of the same should be fully available. Where ITC is not available, then valuation disputes are very likely to come up because authorities in those cases would be typically looking for examples where no consideration is charged for the inbound services, and would like to value it so that client would be because of which a company in India, the importer of services, would be subject to higher reversal of input tax credit. Similarly, for outbound scenarios for goods, because of the specific definition and no condition of recovering convertible foreign exchange, free supply of goods may still qualify as export under GST. The permissibility and limits have to be seen from customs and exchange control regulations perspective as well. And for services, where there is no consideration that is recovered, but the export of services is still happening on a free of cost basis, this will lead to problems because the services provided free of cost may not qualify as zero rated supply at all in GST, and GST exposure is very likely and leading to litigation in this scenario.
Right. Now we're talking about free of cost goods and services. I think, let's look at the most critical aspect, which is of a financial transaction, transaction involving corporate guarantee. Now we all are aware, how corporate guarantee is being used as an instrument to fund the Indian operations, and what is the importance of corporate guarantee. And at the same time, we are also aware the kind of complexity that the corporate guarantee involves when it comes to a transfer pricing consideration. Especially, I think most of you who have dealt with a corporate guarantee transaction, they would know that it is very challenging to justify a corporate guarantee related pricing to a tax authorities. Even the latest OECD final guidelines that have come up for the financial transaction, while it discusses corporate guarantee at length, it also discusses the shareholder function. If you all notice, it does not discuss how to value or how to assign a price to a performance guarantee. So this is a very, very complex topic, corporate guarantee. We have tried to put up 2 case studies in inbound and an outbound scenario and try to analyze how corporate guarantee can become a challenge, when we look at GST and a transfer pricing together. So let's take our first case. We have an inbound scenario where a parent entity in USA provides a corporate guarantee to the bank, and the bank in turn provides a loan to the Indian company. Now, if the Indian company has borrowed and on the strength of the corporate guarantee of the parent entity, what happens is the question can come whether this can be a corporate guarantee given by the parent entity, whether that can be a free of cost service by the parent entity to the Indian entity. Well, it's a highly debatable question whether a corporate guarantee at all can be called as a service, because as most of you must be aware, every corporate guarantee has to be delineated given the OECD guidelines, and it has to be analyzed whether the corporate guarantee is for a shareholder function or whether it is really adding to the Indian entity's saving in the rate of interest or Indian entity enhancing its borrowing capacity. So the challenge will appear from a GST perspective, because if for GST perspective, if you start valuing these corporate guarantees for which the Indian entity is not paying anything, then the similar question will arise as to if you value it for GST purposes, then can you really pay from a transfer pricing perspective also? So does valuation from a GST perspective mean that the Indian entity can also pay such corporate guarantee commission to the PQR? Well, it's very, very hard to defend corporate guarantee commission charges paid by the Indian entity, because more often than not, you would come across the parent entity has given a corporate guarantee and tax authorities have taken a position that these are all shareholding related function, and therefore Indian entity ought not to have charged. So what appears to be, a GST leviable services under the GST regime, it appears to be a shareholder function under the Indian regime. Shiva, any thoughts?
Yes, as you mentioned, Lokesh, from a GST standpoint, whenever an Indian company is eligible to full input tax credit, it would always seek to be compliant with the GST provisions. And even if there is no explicit consideration given for a guarantee received from a foreign parent, it would be advisable from GST perspective to value these services and pay GST on reverse charge and take credit, so that compliance with GST law is in full measure. Although it may work and it may not be allowed from a TP perspective. So this is a classic example where the objectives under both laws from a taxpayer's point of view can be at cross purposes.
Yeah, no, very, very rightly said, Shiva. So, and guarantee as is, I tell you, there are very complex challenges in valuing or determining what could be a potential guarantee commission. Let's look at an outbound scenario. An outbound scenario, unlike the inbound scenario, tax authorities would be always hounding you or insisting you that there has to be a charge. Whereas till date, as you all are aware, even post the amendment of Finance Act 2012, guarantee is still a very contentious issue, and we have High Court level rulings which have said that a corporate guarantee is not an international transaction at all. It remains to be seen whether all these High Court rulings or High Court judgments will still hold good, given that the OECD final guidelines have made it so clear that not only the explicit support, even the implicit support provided in the form of a corporate guarantee or a guarantee will have to be looked at from a transfer pricing perspective. So from an outbound scenario perspective, tax authorities would always insist upon charging the guarantee commission. But the same question arises that, if the Indian entity, let's say in this example, if the Indian entity has provided a corporate guarantee so that the US entity borrows and makes an acquisition, can it really be said to be, providing a service? Because the purpose of acquisition or the beneficiary of the acquisition is going to be ultimately ABC India. Therefore, it is very difficult to suggest or to insist the Indian entity to charge a corporate guarantee commission for this guarantee, which is eventually going to benefit them. Right? Even OECD guidelines, if you follow, it says that there is a litmus test to be applied in each of the corporate guarantee cases. The litmus test is if the guarantee enhances the borrowing capacity of the borrower, then it becomes a shareholder function. If the guarantee leads to reduction or some concession to the guarantee receiver in the interest rate, then that can be treated as a corporate guarantee for the purpose of charge. Otherwise, if it is going to enhance the borrowing capacity, then it will not lead to a service and it needs to be called as a shareholding function. Right? So while TP purposes, it will get qualified as shareholding function. I don't know if the similar concept exists in the GST regime, because GST regime, they would always look at free of cost services and they would want to value, right, Shiva?
Yes, Lokesh. And in fact, this issue of outbound corporate guarantee, where an Indian entity gives a guarantee for a loan taken by an overseas subsidiary, has been an active issue from a litigation standpoint since service tax regime. Even where these transactions have happened between two domestic parties, the service tax authorities have issued show cause notices to companies who have provided this corporate guarantee to their related parties, and sought to apply valuation rules under service tax to impute a consideration to such transactions. When this similar scenario is considered in this international scenario, an interesting outcome can be seen here, as I will explain. The outbound guarantee commission, even if notionally considered, and we have seen this in practical examples during GST audits, where companies are recording in their books of accounts corporate guarantee commission on a notional basis as an income, and wherever such income is recorded even notionally, the issue arises whether on such income and this corporate guarantee provided would qualify as export or not. And as I said previously, due to a specific condition that for any supply to qualify as export, especially of services, there is a condition that convertible foreign exchange should be received. And when such corporate guarantee commission is only notional and not actual, this may lead to a scenario of denial of export benefits for any such corporate guarantee provided, and may invite notices, as have been coming under the service tax regime, for payment of GST on the Indian party.
Yeah, right, Shiva. I think all along we have been talking about an instrument called as guarantee, but there are so many occasions when we see that the parent simply provides a letter of comfort. And as most of you must be aware, a letter of comfort is very different, a very diluted form of a corporate guarantee. A letter of comfort simply says that I stay invested in the company, and therefore, as such, it is not explicitly assuming the liability of the guaranteed or the person receiving the guarantee. And letter of comfort is still a matter of concern even from a transfer pricing perspective. But similar question can arise. If you are valuing corporate guarantee, should you value letter of comfort also? Well, I don't see an exception. So that becomes a challenge.
Lokesh, I'll just briefly mention here that there will be the risk in the letter of comfort type of situations would be significantly lower under GST, because this will not create any legally binding for any Indian company where only a letter of comfort is provided to a foreign bank, and therefore it can be said that there is no activity or no obligation that is undertaken by an Indian company for the foreign parent. So the risk will be significantly lower, is what I wanted to comment here.
Sorry, Shivendra, I think Lokesh has got the audio.
Shiva, you want to?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Lokesh is back.
Shiva, you want to take up the intermediary related concept?
Yes. So here we come to a very interesting concept where from GST standpoint, the intermediary risk becomes very important to consider. Let's first look at and understand the example that is there on the slide. Here, as we can see, there is a XYZ INC which is located abroad, having a subsidiary in India, XYZ India. The entity is working on a cost-plus model, and it is engaged in conducting various activities of sales and marketing, coordinating and licensing, as well as market research. And any supplies that are fructified in India of goods and services are made directly by the overseas parent to end customers in India. Now, here a very interesting scenario emerges, and the question to ponder here is whether the activity of XYZ India is in the nature of intermediary services or not. As you are all aware, the concept of intermediary has been a bone of contention since the service tax regime, and because of the definitions are continuing in the GST regime as well, that controversy will also continue. And there have been no significant judicial precedents also at higher authorities level. Only few controversial advance rulings have been issued in this regard. in this scenario, specifically, the important points to consider are from an intermediary standpoint. First, we need to understand what is the definition of the intermediary. So intermediary is anybody who is facilitating or arranging a supply between two persons and does not make that supply on his own account. Here, if we see the activities of XYZ India, if those activities are in the nature of actively searching for customers, identifying individual customers, and facilitating the supply between XYZ and the end customer, including negotiation of the contract and having rights to conclude the contract. And the consideration is somewhere linked to the performance or the conclusion of sales of the parent in India, then there is a very high likelihood that such services and the cost plus markup that the XYZ India is recovering from XYZ INC would fall under the ambit of intermediary services. And intermediary services as the place of supply for them is specifically given under the GST law to be the location of the service provider, that is XYZ India, which will fall in India. Therefore, the place of supply being in India this service will not qualify as zero rated supply, and therefore GST would be applicable on such a transaction. Now, GST applicable on such a transaction would remain a cost in the supply chain, as there is no possibility for a foreign entity to recover this GST or claim any input tax credit on such GST. So these are the questions. These are the factors which will lead to a intermediary risk in this example. I'd also like to say a scenario where the intermediary risk may be significantly reduced. This will only happen in a scenario where the activities of XYZ India are limited to conducting market research or advertising and promotion of the brand of the overseas entity, and which does not lead to a specific identification of customers. Further, the cost plus recovery from XYZ India is also not in the form of commission that can be linked to the performance of XYZ India of identifying specific customers for XYZ INC. In such a scenario, it may still be possible to contend that the activities of XYZ India are not an intermediary insofar as they do not facilitate any supply between two parties, that is XYZ INC and the end customer in India. And therefore, it may be possible to take a position that such services are export of services and no GST should be applicable on it.
I think you mentioned an important point, Shivendra. There is not much of guidance available as of now on this topic, although
Correct.
most of the multinationals are, I can see that they are concerned. A lot of concern is there on the intermediary related risk. Now, a corollary can be drawn, a similar inference can be drawn. Let's say for intermediary purposes, once it is contended or once it is demonstrated that the Indian company has performed XYZ function, then I think that has to be looked at whether it will lead to any permanent.
Lokesh, I think we have lost your audio.
Yes, I think Lokesh's audio is a bit distorted. Shivendra, would you like to continue, please?
Yes.
Whatever it is deriving. Hello?
Yes, Lokesh, you were not audible for the last 30 seconds.
Sorry, apologies. I think there's some. All right. No, I was talking about a permanent establishment related risk which might arise because of the intermediary related concept that is being triggered on the Indian company, which is rendering services to end customers directly in India. And the P risk, especially will arise if it is found out under the GST that the Indian company is doing negotiation of contracts, etc., and also has authority to conclude the contract. Now, those will create a P risk kind of situation for the parent entity in India, and which will expose entire revenue which they are earning from the Indian jurisdiction. So, we look at one more example on the intermediary risk very quickly. Here, the customers are located in India. Shiva, you want to develop upon
Yes.
this? This is the back office scenario.
Yes, and this is a very important from GST perspective, and this has been a bone of contention again for the BPO service providers in India. And the typical model followed is that there are various back office support services that are rendered by Indian parties to the foreign entities. And in this example, as you can see that the services are rendered by XYZ India to the end customers in India, and the recovery is happening from the foreign company. This is for such services, the practice generally was that not to qualify these services at all as an intermediary services. Back office services and the ITES sector in India being so important from an export perspective and from a national standpoint of view, that practically the intermediary risk that existed in such a model was typically ignored by the service providers, and there is on a practical basis there was no GST that was applicable or being charged by these service providers in India until and few advanced rulings under GST made the issue very controversial, and certain notices were being issued to back office service providers asking for GST to be paid and qualifying them as intermediary. Due to these advanced rulings and the definition of intermediary services remaining controversial, this issue will lead to, or likely to lead to, a very big litigation in the coming time. For now, it can be said that because of XYZ India is rendering IT-enabled services to the end customers in India, there is a nuance that should be considered here. One, whether the intermediary service definition covers only the facilitation part of the activity of the Indian service provider, that is only to the extent where the transaction can be smooth between an overseas party and an Indian customer, and only that commission part itself is leviable to can be qualified as intermediary. And the second, that the entire services, the entire gamut of services, that is IT-enabled backend services, which are being rendered by XYZ India, will be considered an intermediary. I think the scenario where the definition provides that wherever a party is supplying services on his own account will not be considered as intermediary services. So whenever these services are contested by the party that they are being provided on their own account, and it is the main service itself that is being provided, there is a possibility, according to this interpretation, that such a model will be outside the intermediary risk.
Right. It's a complex topic really to cover up in a short time, but I think you touched upon it well, Shiva. We go to the next slide. So I think we have been talking about free of cost goods and services, and I think most of you might have heard about a concept of advertising, marketing, and promotion related expenses, and how challenging it has become for the taxpayer to defend the AMP expenses before the tax authorities. Now, the case that I wanted to put up here is, if it is alleged by the tax authorities that the AMP expenses have been incurred by the Indian entity, and that is beyond the normal routine, and the Indian entity has provided in a way a service of developing an intangible related marketing intangible for the parent.
Lokesh, I'm sorry, but we lost you again. There seems to be some difficulty with your audio. Shubhendra, would you want to come from here, please?
Hello?
Yeah, I think Lokesh is back.
I am really sorry. I think there is some issue with the network.
No,
I was just touching upon. I was just touching upon the AMP related expenses, and this is conceptually, while it is no very different from the free of cost services that we already discussed, however, what I wanted to highlight is, these are the issues which are being faced by the taxpayers very regularly, and anything that is beyond the normal routine AMP expenses is getting challenged by the tax authorities. And therefore, that question can come that if you make an adjustment from a transfer pricing perspective, should the GST say that the GST also should have been levied? Well, it's an open question as of now. That takes us to a last case study where we've tried to discuss what happens in a situation where you have sale of goods from a tax holiday undertaking to the non-tax holiday undertaking, and thereafter when the non-tax holiday undertaking takes it to the end customer, then how would the prices be determined for both GST as well as the transfer pricing perspective? So in our example, we have said that, let's say ABC India, who's a distributor, purchases the pharma products from its tax holiday entity at XYZ price, and it sells it at 100 rupees. So all of you must be aware that for GST purposes, the valuation can be done at 90% of the further selling price of the ABC India. And therefore, let's say if for GST purposes, if the supply of pharma goods is valued at 90, the question arises, will the transfer pricing authorities accept it as a transfer price? Because the two entities, one of the entities is from a tax holiday undertaking, and therefore the transfer pricing will also be applicable in this case. The question is whether the transfer pricing authorities will accept it. Well, in my view, no. It will have to go through the same cycle of justifying one of the most appropriate method to defend the price of 90. And therefore, by default, the price of 90 will not be accepted. Right, very quickly, Shiva, you want to touch upon the interplay of GST and TP authorities?
Yes. So GST being still at a nascent stage, only 2 to 3 years since its introduction, it will be interesting to see how the authorities approach the dichotomy between the TP assessments and GST assessments, especially in cases where the increased value adopted under TP assessment, which is completed after 2 to 3 years, whether that will be also considered by GST authorities for levying tax, because under GST, the transactions are complete and the compliances are done month to month, and the audits are also done from the assessee's point of view every year. So any TP adjustment which is made very subsequent into time, 2 to 3 years after the GST returns are filed, whether that increased value or the adjustment will lead to opening up of GST assessments as well. That is an interesting question which will be answered only in the future, where authorities really begin the department or audits under GST.
Right. No, that's right, Shiva. I think it's only the time will tell. COVID-19, I think most of us are still grappling. In fact, most of us are still, at this stage, trying to envisage the kind of impact that it is going to have. And it is for sure that both GST as well as transfer pricing regime will see a lot of drastic changes, especially transfer pricing analysis. For sure, I know that will be very different for the year 2021, and it is not going to be the same normal routine transfer pricing analysis that would happen in a typical scenario. So I am seeing a lot of impact due to COVID-19 as well. So very quickly, should we take up questions now, Shiva?
Yes.
Right. Jugal, you want to?
Sure. Thanks, Lokesh. Sorry you experienced a few technical difficulties at your end. But thank you very much to both you and Shivendra for the insights that you've shared. We invite all of our listeners to put their questions in the chat box in the webinar control panel, and we'll put them across to Lokesh and Shivendra. We have exceeded time, but we will entertain your questions for a few minutes and try to pick up the key ones with Lokesh and Shivendra. In case if there are any questions pending, please do not worry. We will get back to you with a response. All right. We have one question, which is I think it's sort of a case study. The Indian company is raising an invoice in USD the parent company and taken as LUT, but at the time of receipt, the parent company paid to the Indian company as equivalent to INR, who changed the currency from USD to INR in their country. What would be the implications under transfer pricing and under GST?
Right. Shiva, you want to take up the GST part?
Actually, there was a problem in the audio. If Jugal can repeat that question, please.
Sure, just give me one moment, Shivendra. All right, the Indian company is raising an invoice in USD to the parent company and taken as LUT, but at the time of receipt, the parent company paid to the Indian company as equivalent to INR to change from USD to INR in their country. What would be the implications under transfer pricing and under GST?
Under GST, if I've understood the question right, is that the consideration has been received in INR and not foreign exchange. In this case, the condition for export may not be satisfied, and therefore the zero rated benefit under GST may not be available. Lokesh, anything from your side?
No, I think from transfer pricing perspective, as well as long as the Indian company gets a full consideration, I don't see a challenge.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. I hope that answers the question. Another question that we have is, for remittance received from a US parent company in India via a Vostro account, can this be qualified as remittance from a transfer pricing point of view? Lokesh, can you pick that up?
Remuneration received by the Indian company in the Vostro account.
That's right.
And what is the service? Is that mentioned?
Unfortunately, that is not mentioned. It's only mentioned remittance received from the US parent company in India via the Vostro account. Can this be qualified as remittance from a transfer pricing point of view?
I think a little bit more will be required from a facts perspective, as in what is the underlying transaction.
No problem. We can pick this up offline with the concerned attendee.
Sure.
I'll just take one or
Yes.
more given the paucity in time. Give me one moment. All right, I have one question for you, Shivendra. In respect of outbound guarantee, will GST still be applicable if the place of supply is outside India?
Yes, this is a very controversial question to consider right now, because under service tax, there was a specific provision that when the place of supply of a service falls outside India, this will not be subject to tax in India. It will not qualify as export, but it will not be subject to tax also. But in that case, the input tax credit was subject to reversal. In GST, there is no such provision which says that because the place of supply falls outside India, it automatically is not, that transaction automatically ceases to be taxable in India. Even if somebody were to take such a position that GST is not applicable on such a transaction, because this convertible foreign exchange condition is not fulfilled, the zero rated benefit will not available, and still the input tax credit reversal would be applicable in such a scenario as well.
All right, thank you. I hope that was the question for our listener. I'll pick up one question for Lokesh. Lokesh, can transfer pricing authorities bind GST authorities and vice versa for the valuation of a transaction?
Hello, sorry, Jugal. I think I was lost. Yeah.
No problem. I can hear you now. I'll repeat the question for you again. Lokesh, can transfer pricing authorities bind GST authorities and vice versa for the valuation of a transaction?
No, as such, there is no binding, but the references can be drawn. You know, there is nothing which stops the tax authorities to interact with each other. For example, you know, customs interacting with TP or TP interacting with GST, and for that matter, it is happening, to my knowledge.
All right.
While it is not binding, but the references can be drawn.
Okay.
I think we can take up the rest of the questions maybe offline. Jugal, we're a little short
Absolutely.
on time, I believe.
Yes, I was just about to come to that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lokesh and Shivendra, for taking out the time to share your valuable insights with the listeners. We hope that the information shared by Lokesh and Shivendra have been useful for the people that have joined this session. We thank you once again for logging in. We hope that you are healthy and stay safe. Thank you very much once again, and we look forward to having you for our next webinar. Thank you, Lokesh. Thank you, Shivendra.
Thank you. Thank you, Jugal. You've been a great support. Thank you.
Thank
And
you, everybody.
apologies for the. Thank you. Bye.